Easy.
You ready?
Easy. Thank you.
All right, I call this meeting to order. This is the Tuesday, September 18th, 2018, regular meeting of the Village of Oxford Planning Commission. And it's now 7 o'clock, so we can get started. We like to start off each meeting with respects to the flag, so if you please stand and join me for a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Secretary, let's do a roll call.
Johnson, absent. Deeg, absent. Douglas,
Here.
Curtis,
Here.
Bama,
Here.
Helmuth,
Here.
Lilac.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Good. I was just going to ask you. All right, thank you very much. And could I hear a motion for the excusing two of our members?
I'll make a motion to excuse Gary Deeg and Adam Johnson from this meeting.
Support.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I have a motion to excuse the absence of two of our fellow commissioners who were courteous enough to let me know that they would not be able to make tonight's meeting, so that counts as an excused absence. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Good. We have a quorum, and so we can commence our meeting. I would now entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda, which is quite limited, as you can see. Any motions?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda for the Village of Oxford Planning Commission agenda for Tuesday, September 18th, 2018.
Second.
All right, again, Mr. Secretary, I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda. I also have a second to that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed say nay. Good. You could say aye, and that would work. So we have an approved agenda for this evening, and I like that. All right, then, moving on to item 5, I would entertain a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from the August 21st, 2018 meeting.
If there are no additions or deletions, I'll make the motion to approve the regular meetings of August 21st.
Support.
All right, Mr. Secretary, once again, I have a motion on the table to approve the minutes for the regular meeting held on the 21st of August in 2018, and I have second for that motion, so all those in favor of approving our previous minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. All right, good. We've approved our minutes. Now, Mr. Secretary, in my packet, do I have any correspondence that has been received since our last regular meeting?
No, sir, you do not.
All right, we'll skip through item 6. I do not believe we have a public hearing scheduled for this evening since there's nothing on this agenda. I also see that there is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Thank you. I see no old business, so we'll skip over that. We have one item under new business. We pretty much set this meeting up as a working meeting to begin our process of creating basically a
An action plan. For
Thank you.
Planning.
Thank you. I just couldn't bring the words to mind. An action plan, basically for any construction or maintenance or projects that the village has that would, for the most part, cover infrastructure, but maybe other things as well.
I can, if you'd like, I can introduce this topic a little bit more.
If you don't mind.
Mario can add in his experience. He has more experience with projects like this. But this topic came up as from our previous discussion of looking at to be more proactive as a commission. How do we put ourselves in a position to be able to do that? And for you all, what Mario and I kind of came up with is the idea of an action plan, having some sort of document that plans out what you all would like to do over the course of the next year. That could be looking at specific ordinance revisions or the concept of ordinance revisions. It could be specific projects that or plans that you'd like to put together for the community. There are a whole wide range of things that Mario can get into a little bit more depth as he's worked on this with other communities before. This document would provide some structure for the commission, ideally it comes from all of your priorities as commission members and representatives of your community. What would you like to see for your constituency? So this plan would form the basis of what is reported on at the end of the year. We traditionally are required to submit a report to Village Council at the end of each year about what we did in the previous year. So this is sort of the other side of that coin. So preemptively, what do we plan to do at the end of the year? What did we do? And then you can form your plan from there. So this would be an annual kind of concept that approximately this time every year you could theoretically look at this document, evaluate what you've done to form your report, and then build your goals for the next coming year. And Mario, if you'd like to add a little bit more from there.
That's the basic concept. It's an opportunity for you to take what's mandated by state statute, which is the annual planning report. That's something that you have already done in the past and you're used to. And it is mainly a status report indicating how many meetings you had to partake in and held, and then also indicating how many reviews and procedure you've undertaken, how many ordinances you've done. So it's a matter of taking a look back, see how far you progressed. But it's also an opportunity to be not only just a report, but that's why we change the wording a little and focus on the idea of an action plan. Other communities take the opportunity to look at the various ordinances and plans that are in your purview and say, let's take a look at what we'd like to do, let's prioritize them, and then let's see what we can accomplish in the coming year. Now, you obviously have to balance that with your other mandated duties, such as when new site plans come in and rezonings and those things, when that's driven by the development of the community. Obviously those may take some time, so maybe the working sessions will have to be balanced with that. But it's always good, especially since we're the planning commission, to plan for the future action. And so before you is the memo summarizing what we're, the idea of having this discussion. And then, how would this come about? Well, their idea basically is if you'd like to undertake more of an action plan rather than just an annual report that is done usually in January, we could have some discussions in the coming months to brainstorm as to what various topics you think you should be discussing, and then prioritizing that list, and then coming up with a draft report so that by the time January comes around, we'll have a draft sample for you to consider that would be both a summary of your actions that'll satisfy state statute, but then also a prioritized list. So it wasn't in your packet, but submitted supplemental to it were just a couple different memos that we've done in the past for other communities. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be that elaborate. It can be if we like. If it wants to, one of the things we can talk about is like how long a time frame you want to have it. Do you want it to be the laundry list of everything, and then say in year one we're going to tackle these top 5, or do you want to say let's just focus on reporting on the 5 that we're going to accomplish in 2019, or whatever that number may be. But that's the idea. Just the idea of let's have a brainstorming session, go over various topics. And that's one reason why in your packet is something that Chris Corey prepared, was taking a look and utilizing the Redevelopment Ready program and its list of various ordinances that the Planning Commission would undertake, and then identifying an initial list of what could be undertaken by the Planning Commission.
So to add to that, we went through and summarized the previous evaluation and came up with this about 3-page list of topics from the Redevelopment Ready communities, best practices that we've identified that the village is not fully adhering to and could be good things to focus on. So these would be, again, starting point concepts. And all of this should be referenced back to the specific needs of our community. Public participation strategy is important, just like having zoning ordinance standards for green infrastructure are important concepts, but are the most immediate issues that you all deem should be tackled by this community. And so that's, it's a reference point. So ideally tonight, we'd like to just have a discussion about what your all's priorities are and coming up with that list of 5 to 10 things that we can take and look at formalizing into a, whatever length document it needs to be, that we can say this is what the commission would like to tackle going forward.
Jack?
Can I give you an example of what I feel we should be working on?
Please.
One example is the solicitation ordinance. I know that the village has a solicitation ordinance. Joe Medor has given us their townships from Richfield, I believe it is, and we are working on a solicitation ordinance. Some of the things in our solicitation ordinance are a little stiffer than what the village has, and I'll give you an example of that. We are going to do background checks. We are going to require pre-registration of a solicitor. We are going to charge a registration fee. There will be a waiting period before the background check is done and a certificate of solicitation is given. There will be fines for not registering, and if a citizen complains, you can call the police, and there will be an ordinance that clearly states what solicitation is. Now, talking to some of the village residents, I heard that there is a small ordinance written for solicitation in the village. What I feel is they should be melded closely together, as close we can, to match. And it's possible that it may be mirrored off each other, or it's possible that there needs to be tweaks. But is that something we should work on? And besides the solicitation ordinance, are there any other ordinances that we could be like you or you like us to streamline the governments so that we all know, hey, listen, you can't solicit unless you have a badge with a picture on it. And you're going to have a background check. Your setbacks for garages are different than ours. That may not need to be touched. But there are a lot of ordinances that might look like they should be a little more closely aligned.
And actually, that brings up a good point and a perfect example, Jack, of one of the things I wanted to touch on is that the Planning Commission has the purview of making recommendations on the zoning ordinance, but then but you as a body also adopt plans related to the future land development of the community. There are definitely other ordinances such as solicitation, which is ancillary or corollary related to other ordinances, but are generally dealt with in some communities, not all, under the general law ordinance. Now, the general law ordinance is the purview of the village council. But the idea would be for this action plan is to identify some of the topics that are somewhat related. Because, for example, when it comes to solicitation ordinances, it's about sometimes it can develop into a land use issue. Because, for example, these operations or salespeople, sometimes they want to have like a pop-up event, or they want to just open up, it could be an opportunity in the DDA, although we don't have too many vacant storefronts, of the idea of letting someone temporarily open a store on a weekend or something. But then solicitation-wise, it could deal with those issues. So what it would be is, for those ordinances that are a little bit more that would be more general law related, it could be a topic that's definitely addressed in our action plan, but then those could be under a heading of general ordinances that the Planning Commission would be willing to undertake under the direction of the council. And so then the council can say, we feel we can handle that one, but there might be other things that they might feel like, well, they could take the advantage of this other body and say, well, let's have the Planning Commission draft up something, get something back to us. So that's a possibility.
One thing that we haven't touched in the township, and it's very prevalent in the village, are food trucks.
Right.
Solicitation is a food truck. They are soliciting. It's usually done on someone else's property. For example, if a food truck comes into one of the village parking lots and starts selling things, and the guy falls down and breaks his face on a taco, I mean, the liability can come back to the village.
Right.
We charge special land uses in the village for outside sales, outside patios and such.
Right.
The township doesn't. We're working on that one. But for food trucks, I know the village doesn't have an ordinance against them, around them, or regulating them. Neither does the township. But we're working on it. So I know this commission cannot expend dollars and work on something until granted by council to do so, just like Planning Commission and the township cannot work on a food truck ordinance unless commissioned by the township. Why reinvent the wheel twice? At least take one and tailor it to the other. We charge a special land use for special events, putting a tent in the village parking lot, but yet you can pull a food truck in the, why wouldn't, and I'll just use this as an example, why wouldn't a tap buy a food truck and put it in the middle of the parking lot rather than put a tent up? Those are the kind of things that there's some disparity in.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example too, because I know I personally written up food truck ordinances and it was a little bit more of a land use related issue. And so I envisioned it being under the zoning ordinance. It was advancing that way because we were going to grant them as temporary uses. But then the community decided to go the other way and they actually turned it into a general law ordinance because then they decided to opt into a little bit more of a operational standpoint, not with food trucks. But that's a perfect example of something that could go either way, but it's an issue. I think that's the thing we need to focus on. Issues that that are related to the village that we can brainstorm on and then prioritize them.
These aren't my issues that I'm bringing up. These are issues that were brought to me from some of the businesses in town.
Yeah.
And we see that, and I'm just bringing it up now because then we would have to say, we would have to recommend to the village council that we'd like to work on 3 different ordinances. That takes planner time, attorney time, and special meeting times, and that's all expenditures of money, and nobody has the authority to do that.
Right.
Secondly, I'll bring them all out, just to throw them out there, is how many members by law is this village supposed to have on the planning commission?
7.
I believe it's one coordinating person from the council.
One from the council, but how many other?
7.
By population, you're supposed to have 5 for X number, and then it goes up by another number. I don't have the enabling act.
Under 9.
I think it's 10,000.
The lowest is 5, the most is 9, I think.
Yeah.
Ours is a relatively new ordinance for the planning commission number, because we used to be at 9. And we
Okay.
just switched it to 7.
And what I'm seeing in today's volunteerism is trying to find people to fill slots. Thank you, Ms. Pollack, for joining us, but it's very hard to find people to come and do work. Do we need 7? And I'm throwing it out there because these are the things I believe we should be investigating and looking at to make us more efficient. Rather than worrying about who's not here and what input they would have, we can move on with what we have and brought forward.
Put it on the list, yeah.
Al, I think that's all I had for action plans.
I was actually more concerned about getting what we have currently in order. For instance, our list of nonconformities.
Oh,
Non-conforming properties and non-conforming uses.
existing nonconforms.
And I think who better than people who live here who no, I know what's for rent in my neighborhood. I know what's owner occupied. I know what's a rental. I think they built their garage too close to the lot line. And if you go back and look, it is. You probably know what's non-conforming in your neighborhood more than anyone else. What uses? Boy, they sure couldn't put a bar there again, or They never get a car dealership in there again. And we're supposed to have a list of non-conforming on file, and I don't believe we do.
And to Mo's point, you have a list of existing non-conforming lots, and when they come in to pull a permit, do you grant them a permit with an existing non-conformity? If they're going to change that to something, they should change it to a conforming ordinance.
Right.
You can't put a second-story garage on if your garage is 3 feet from the property line. Just an example to help support her with that.
I will agree with the issue of existing nonconformities. We run into that issue very frequently. I do not believe we have a running list of all the existing nonconformities. We obviously we know of the ones that we've dealt with in the last year or two since we've had all this turnover, and just some of the projects that we've dealt with through Chris and all that. We have background information, but yeah, there are a lot of existing ones that.
And I think is the non-conforming use would be the easy part. The non-conforming property dimensions might be a problem.
Yeah.
But not that much of a problem.
Well, and I think that's a great point. So just for example, the on Pleasant Street with the trailers, and it was formerly an industrial use. It was zoned industrial, and then it's since been changed to C2. But with the one issue we've run into for existing nonconformities is that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mario, but if the use maintains, you even if it switches ownership, if the use maintains and there's no gap of larger than 6 months, they can continue to have the same use.
Non-conforming.
Yeah. Yeah. So and that's.
But
so
but you have to go back and look. Have those trailers always been there?
as far as I know, but it's only been a year. So I see your point. I agree. Developing a list of existing nonconformities. Put it on the list.
Put it on the list. I got it on mine. Good. All right. This is
mine.
Good progress so far. Thank you very much, Jack. So far, we have a number of categories that could go into an action plan. And
I do have one more.
go ahead, Jack. Please take over.
The one more, no, don't take over, I'll just talk. The one more that the community leaders has taken on is this M24 rebuild project in 2020. Community leaders is now meeting twice a month, and we are drawing up observations that we have, what MDOT says they're going to do, and then what we can do in the village to try to encourage coming to the village, mobility in the village, cross-traffic, those kind of things that we're trying to do in the community leaders. Some of that could be done in the planning. For example, when this street gets tore up, maybe we should have a one-way street. And what role do we play in it? Maybe there should be a higher speed limit on a street because they're going to use that for the detour. Maybe we hire NODA to have an off-site parking and shuttle people in. These ideas that come forward from the community leaders have to go somewhere in order to enact them. I know Village Council will have the final gavel slam for spending the money to do it and enacting it, but those plans for 2020, why don't we have action plans to address it also? Is there anything that we should do as a planning commission to seek out those kind of remedies?
Is there an avenue to bring that information before us?
Sure.
We would need coordination between this group and the Planning Commission.
Two of the community leader memberships are in the room right now, so.
I'm sure he's not talking about me.
Well, you could be.
All right, thank you. All right, Jack, is that good for you now?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're looking at a number of categories that could go under an action plan approach, and I'll talk about this in just a second. The five categories now I have are ordinance reviews, in terms of prioritizing. For instance, do we have ordinances that are out of date, or, as Jack mentioned, are they out of sync with township ordinances, and can they be streamlined perhaps to more closely mimic and be in, help me out with another word again, Drew, in sync with what the township does, so that we're all sharing the same regulations. I'm sure it's very difficult to have the village do one thing and then the township do something else, and that kind of out of sync can't be very helpful, I think, in a lot of experiences.
We're doing the work twice.
Exactly, and that I like that too, because we could hold, for instance, we could hold some joint sessions and craft some of these things together.
That's a perfect example.
You know,
One of our action plans would be to hold
if
it.
everybody were to come together for a few working sessions, we could look at those particular ordinances where we have commonality and say, you know, maybe we can come to terms with finding something that would work for all of us. So I like that as well. So I'd like to put that on the list. The second category is a capital improvement plan. Drew, you touched upon this in your opening remarks, and you talked about perhaps having a short-range set of goals that would be looking at the type of things that we'd like to take on over the next year. I would like to add to that and also have a longer range set, because there's lots of things that you can't do in 1 year. Sometimes things take longer, and it takes a considerable greater amount of planning and projection forward. In 3 years, we'd like to do this. And so if we start working towards it now, maybe when 3 years gets here, we'll be ready for it. You know, because I'm afraid if you just keep taking things in small bites, some of the more pressing issues won't get resolved. And we have plenty of pressing issues. And so I'd like to consider longer range plans as well, and try to apply a plan of action to those as well. The other thing, another category, is perhaps a review of our bylaws. Jack brought up a very important distinction of our commission membership. Is it appropriate? Is it, I think that's certainly worthy of consideration, Jack. You know, I don't know if I would be in favor of changing it, but nevertheless, it's no reason why we couldn't discuss it. You know, and we could certainly look at that. The fourth item is existing nonconformities. It's my understanding that there is no current list of existing nonconformities. I'm not 100% certain how a list like that gets made, Drew. And, you know, because that's obviously that's a very labor-intensive type thing where basically each parcel of property needs to be inspected. And I'm not exactly sure how that does. But where this comes from, how this is done, Mario, maybe you have some insight into that, and I don't necessarily need it right now, but I'd like that to be on the plate for future discussion as to is there a way to do this, and is there a method, and if we were to undertake something like that, how is it done, who would do it, and certainly how much is it going to cost? That's a big deal. And then finally, like Jack says, perhaps coordination with the community leaders who are working on the M24 2020 rebuild of our highway here, and see if there's something we can't do to coordinate some of that action as well. So I like that. Go ahead, Jack.
In that M24 rebuild, you need to look at your ordinances for the front, because with your streetscape, I don't know if you're changing any of the existing planning ordinances for the front yards or for the frontage of the buildings. I don't know this. I don't know what, so those things might have to be done from the streetscape proposal into the ordinances, may have to be changed if you allow no parking, diagonal parking, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So, Mario, during our last meeting, actually after our last meeting, we had a little bit of meeting after the meeting where several of us stayed around and picked your brain for a few minutes, and I believe it was Joe and Drew and I and you. And we had a little bit of a wish list of the kind of things that we would like to try to address, because personally I think these are important things that the village is facing. You know, I'm always going to fuss about the state of Park Street, you know, and one of my great desires is to have some of our roads repaved. And of course, paying I'm an investor, so I think about things in terms of cash flow. Paying for that out of cash flow is very difficult. You know, with a limited budget, there's not money just sitting around waiting to be put to use, is my expectation, and that pretty much every dime is spent and already allocated before we get to things like infrastructure improvement. And so we had talked during that time we spent just informally about the idea of actually having an assessment done at some point in the not too distant future about what the state of our existing infrastructure is, and if indeed we can attain that assessment, then setting up a prioritized list of not necessarily Park Street first, but what projects should be done first, you know, and if you're going to consider things like repaving, one, where do we get the money? What kind of monies are available? How is that attained? Part of my goal in having this action plan is that I seriously believe in my heart that money is available if you can demonstrate to somebody that you have a plan. And if not, then that's a shame. But even so, my expectation is that, you know, I can go to somebody and say, we sure would like to have a grant, or we'd like to have this, or whatever it is. I don't know exactly what that is yet. And I'll ask you for some help in terms of how do communities do this, you know, when they need to acquire money to be able to perform capital projects like this. How do they pay for it? You know, but I know that it's got to be a much more compelling argument if you have a plan. These over the next 10 years, this is what we need to do. Tick, 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 and it makes that sound too, tick, 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 just like that. And demonstrate to them that we've put a lot of thought into this and that we actually have a plan, and these are the things we'd like to try to accomplish. Leslie, please.
And for that reason, I think that developing an economic development strategy and integrating it into all these activities is important, because that is the ultimate rationale for not only improving things for existing residents, but making this community attractive and into the future. And that's the planning part of what we do. And I think strategies don't happen unless you sit down and talk about them and really lay it out. And I think that during all of this review of existing ordinances and cleaning up, it's sort of like a metaphor of cleaning up your house before you decide you're going to build an addition. You know, you have to have a clean house to know what you can do, but if you want to do an addition, you have to plan for that. So that would be, my preference would be to also look at ways that kind of piggybacking a little bit on what Jack was saying, that as we're looking at these things, let's also incorporate this other issue so we don't duplicate efforts later on. You know, while we're looking at strategies, while we're looking at, you know, M24 and streetscapes and whatnot, you know, we should also be looking at how our ordinances are friendly to citizens as well as new investors, and all of that should happen, you know, at the same time. So I know that at the end of the list here, Drew included some of his thoughts about that, and that's one of the things he mentioned I think is quite important. So I'll just rest my case there.
Leslie, go ahead and address that list and let me know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, at the end of Drew's summary here, from this list, I see the following tasks should be completed, and then there are, you know, 8 or 10 different things there. Some of them are what we've been talking about, like create a capital improvements plan. Some are things that maybe will come to pass, such as a public participation strategy. Improving the community development portion of the website would be something that makes sense. If we're going to be working on ordinance review, we need to be able to communicate and have a way to get input from the public.
That's very low-hanging fruit, too, if you don't mind my saying. So that's something that is very easy to accomplish.
Yeah, and
won't cost a fortune if it does.
I messed around a little bit in the website just to remind myself, and I think there are definitely some things that could make that just a little more user-friendly. Maybe it isn't a complete revamp. It's really all about like that house cleaning idea.
Leslie, I hate to say this, but would you be willing to work with somebody who's on tap to do some of that work?
Why do you hate to say that?
Well, because you bring it up, and I know that when you bring things up, you don't want to necessarily be responsible for it, but I'm all about creating action plans here, and I think that if somebody who has a passion for it was involved, even just in a limited consultation basis with, I imagine, Mr. Secretary, that we have somebody on tap, might even be yourself, who's responsible for...
Yes, so upshot with this conversation, we are in the process of having our websites redesigned as we speak, so this would be an excellent time to talk about how a community development portion of our website is laid out, what information should be, there's all these different pieces that should be available, but how should it look, and I think the help would be fantastic to have another set of eyes looking at how will this be laid out.
I would be willing to help with that, but I do think that the commission as a unit needs to also give direction to what they think as a group should be going on there. Because we can make it as great as we want, but it should reflect the whole commission's
Of course, and I agree.
Well, and that gets a little bit to, from your all's perspective, the vision and the policies that represent that vision and how they're represented on the website. So, I mean, the idea is that through this action strategy or these different plans, the master plan is the greatest example I can think of. They are representations of your all's policy choices at how this community will look. And then as administrators and consultants, we carry out your visions and plans and bring those out. So in having help in developing, on the low-hanging fruit aspects of how it comes out, it's great to have the help. It's great to have community members, helping us with that process because, Mario and myself, we don't live in this community. We don't have the experiences in the village that you all do. And so that extra perspective helps even on those smaller things. So that, I like that idea as well.
Rose, please.
One of the things I brought to Drew's attention today is we don't have a welcoming packet for new members. A copy of the zoning ordinance, a copy of the bylaws, a copy of
Commission members.
the names of the commission members.
It's a welcome packet for commission members,
Right.
is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I haven't been feeling very welcome.
I did that on purpose.
If there's any training that...
Leslie, don't feel bad, I wasn't welcomed either.
If there was any training that commission members should be looking into when they're first on board, I think that should be one of our number one priorities, is trying to make sure everybody has the materials they need to work with.
You know what I'm going to say, Rose? Would you be kind enough to work with Drew to prepare something like that for our new members?
I did tell him today that I would.
Good. I really appreciate that, because I agree. I have to admit that from my own standpoint, although I've been on the commission for a while now, it was very intimidating to start fresh with pretty much no information. And I guess I could go out and dig it up myself, but it would have been extremely helpful if I could have been, if somebody said, here, study this, and we'll bring you up to
And that's
speed
why
real
you have the
quick.
bylaws in front of you today.
Right,
Because
I
I told
appreciate
them, I
that.
said, we should have a copy, even though it's
Right.
not a signed copy. It should be a signed copy.
Sure.
But,
Get them all signed. Oh, you know what I could have? I saw suited. She's right there. Could have signed them.
Jack, please go ahead.
The longer we sit here, the more I think about, so we should hurry up.
Okay, that's fine.
What about a one-stop review and report card is how we're doing on the one-step strategy? I know we have a Main Street watching out, make sure that they do it, but we sometimes forget about where we're at with one-stop, and if we're doing what we pledged to do or promised to do or think we should be doing to improve our processes and performance. So an action plan could be the one-stop review and the policies and procedures.
And we could definitely get representatives from Oakland County to come out and participate in that.
Yes, you can.
They love to come spend time with us. So
We don't have to adopt every one of their policies, and I would never say that we should.
They just wanna-
But if you've got some good ones, are we using them? And if we're not, look at the opportunities we're missing out on, so that's an action plan. I'm going to shut my mouth from now on.
You're doing fine, Jack.
I just want to get back to a little bit about what Rose was talking about. In addition to the welcome packet, I think there are training opportunities that we should not only make available to you all, but should be a part of the kind of orientation process. And that could be another recommendation from you all is having a formal budget recommended or included in the budget, not a tremendous amount of money, but even if it's $1,000 for continuing education. And there are specific programs like through Michigan State University Extension, they offer the Citizen Planner training, which leads to the Master Citizen Planner certification. And these are available specifically for Planning Commission members as well as the administrators and consultants that support you all. In addition, I've found out that our insurance company, Nickel and Saff, will cover part of the payment for that. So I haven't got this all fleshed out to bring to you yet, but I'm saying that incorporating some formal education into as you join the Planning Commission process, that could be something that you all try to include in requests that from council, that can we have a couple dollars to try to do this and improve our how we do
Drew,
this.
please put that on the list going forward. That's something I'm particularly interested in, and I think that we would benefit greatly.
I was going to say.
By that, because frankly, we're a bunch of, just a second, Rose, I'm sorry
Yeah,
to cut you off.
That's okay.
We're a bunch of concerned citizens here, and that's pretty much why we're here, is that we care about this community. We have a heart for this community. We have a heart for service. But sometimes I find it very difficult to try to figure out how to move forward when I really don't know what I'm doing. And I depend a lot upon Mario, I depended a lot upon Chris, I even depend a lot upon you, which I'm very grateful for, and I depend upon Jack a lot, I depend upon all of us, to bring things forward, to say, what if we tried this, what if we did this, why can't we do this? And I'm kind of like, I want to move forward and push the boundaries a little bit and make this a little bit more, I said last time, I want to make this a more proactive organization. I want to make it, there's a lot that we could do here, but some of it is, we have to know how and what, and so I don't think it's unreasonable to add training to that to become
Pretty good list.
it's a very good list. Mario, Rose, did you have something, please?
Yes, we need to be conscious of a budget to present to council, so when they go to adopt it next year, that we have a dollar amount that, we want to have this for these different items.
And that's ultimately, hopefully, what comes from this, is that as you complete this and we assign, we can assign dollar figures to these things. And as a whole, there is a Planning Commission section in the Planning and Zoning section of the budget, and so there is the space to do it. Now, can we find the funds? Are they willing to allocate the funds with a plan in place? I think there's a much better shot of getting that done.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to pick a place to start. What are we going to ask council for? We can't ask them for a list of 50 things. What do we want to work on this year?
Well,
Are we gonna work-
if I may, sorry to interrupt,
Please.
Maureen. As I mentioned, the additional thing was, I think it was a brainstorming session. Sounds like this has been the actual good brainstorming session. So if you'd like, we can either formalize it and let you ruminate on this a little bit more, and you can come back with more items, or you can direct me to just draft up a memo summarizing what we've discussed tonight to start a next discussion about prioritization, because I think that's what you would be maybe referring to, Maureen, is prioritizing.
Some of these things, there's almost no cost to them.
Right.
Bob Davis is on retainer. We work for free. Mario's he's our big expense over there. We'll just have to talk him down on his prices.
Sure.
But until we know what we want, yeah, he's giggling too. So is Jack Jackson.
That's right.
Until we figure out what we want, there's really no telling what the price would be.
Well, I think it might be a little premature to start prioritizing personally, but I do think it would be helpful to see a summary and to kind of do a quick analysis or package it up for us and make it easier for
Very
us
good.
to continue to brainstorm or add more detail.
Definitely, I could definitely do that. It'll just be a brief summary. I can add a couple of comments. and then we can have a further discussion. And so this is good because, this being September, technically the annual report begins in January. People adopt at the beginning of the year. So we can have this discussion and then just move forward, and then by the time January rolls around, it'll be set and ready to go.
Mario and Drew, I want to make this a recurring agenda item. And each time when we meet, Mario, I would like you to bring us suggestions. And in particular, I want to talk at least about my top 3 items here. Existing nonconformities, we're just going to have to think about. I don't really know how to do that. And if you have suggestions, I'll be happy to entertain them. And perhaps we can have further discussion about them later. This is an important issue. I just don't know how to deal with it yet. I want to see suggestions for ordinance reviews. You're probably more familiar with our ordinances than anyone else. And I think that between the two of you, you can discuss that and find out this one is a prime candidate for review. This one is a prime candidate for review. Or none of them are. They're all really pretty darn good. And you guys are running state-of-the-art ordinances, and I don't think you have anything to do there, but I'd like to know that. And if there's something that needs our attention, either update it, it's out of date, it's et cetera, or it's out of sync with the surrounding community, that's something that's worthy of discussion. I want you to consider, and I actually want all of us to consider, components of a short and long-range plan for capital improvement. An adjunct to that, Mario, is I want to know how are we going to try to pay for things like that. If we want to replace a sewer line, how are we going to afford it? Is that a bond? Is that what's done? Or does the state of Michigan offer grants for doing work like that for communities who don't have a lot of tax revenue? I'd like to know. I don't have a clue how that stuff gets done, but I'm hoping that, a 10 to 15 minute discussion would at least bring us up to date on what are our options. And how, if we were faced with that, what if we had an emergency? My neighbors had a water line break in their front yard, and it took 9 months to get it fixed.
Wow.
I had the sidewalk torn up for 9 months while barricades were in place. The sidewalk was out. I had a hole 4x4 that was 6 inches deep of water for 9 months. Well, that's not an emergency, but I got a broken water line. Am I contaminating my neighbor's water? Not me, we, is the village contaminating my neighbor's water source because there's a break in the line. It just got fixed. 9 months. Okay. But there has to be a way to take care of things like that. And, and my guess is we probably have a very old infrastructure. And I think it's important that at some point we have to sit down and say, what is it? How bad is it? I heard that we have wooden sewer lines in some places. Is that true? Is that possible?
I wouldn't be
If we
surprised if
have,
that was the case.
our infrastructure is not that. The village has done a very good job of replacing a majority of their water mains.
I'm glad to hear it.
And I'm not certain where this water line, was it a main or a service?
I think it's just a service.
Because there's a difference between a service
Yeah.
and the responsibility of a service. Were there wooden mains? I'm sure there were wooden mains. Are there wooden mains? I don't think so.
I hope not.
I mean, we have a whole.
I hope not.
There's never been a wooden main on it.
Okay,
I've seen.
all right. And Jack says, I don't think that's our job to do that. And if that's the case, I get it.
And I don't believe there were ever, I hope there were never wooden sewer mains.
Okay.
Just water.
All right,
And
okay, that's all
a
fine.
mess.
And indeed, if Jack is right, Mario, you may come back to see me and say, Gary, you're overreaching. You don't have the authority to do that. It's not your responsibility, and it's not your job. And I can take that. But I would like to know, because I've always been about boundaries. I want to know, where are my boundaries? How do I get something done? If I want to do something, how do I get it done? And if it's overreaching my authority, I'm good with that. But I'd like to know where those boundaries are to a certain extent. Leslie? Just a second, Mom.
At what point do we seek input from the council in any of these plans and any of these reviews? For example, capital improvement plan, do we develop a plan and take it to the council for final approval? Do we need to know how the council would, how they would lean in one direction or other as we're planning?
Do you care to address this right now, or do you want to, is that a rhetorical question?
I can say initially, just from a planning standpoint in the state statute, this body is the one that adopts the master plan for the land development. Now, capital improvements and infrastructure is closely related to it, but the council is the one that does have the
Infrastructure.
authority, it so chooses, to allocate the funds. So the most successful ones I've ever seen are the ones where the council worked in coordination with the planning commissions, and then received a recommendation, and then the council is the one that actually makes the decision. That's what I've seen in the past. In other communities, I'm not sure how the village would want to work.
That's adequate, Mario, and I thank you very much for that. Jack?
Hey, the longer you sit here, the more I can come up with. There's
And
some,
yet, Gary hasn't given you a thing to do.
no.
I'm waiting for him to say something that's an appropriate suggestion. Go ahead, Jack.
In some communities, they do a build-out plan. A build-out plan tells you what is left to build out, what are the requirements for sewer as it's zoned, what are the requirements for water. Do we have a build-out plan in this community? Should we have a build-out plan? And I give you this example only because I know there are developers along the northern M24 corridor in the township that are looking for more sewer capacity. Now, based on the size of the line, the village has excess sewer capacity. When I say excess, we don't know what excess is based on we don't have a build-out plan. For example, if some of your vacant land is high density, you may require a lot of REUs for sewer. If it's low density, you may have a profit center there with a developer that's going in on the north that may purchase some of those REUs to go down the sewer through the village. So the topic is build-out plan. Are you familiar with those, Mario?
Oh, yes.
Is that residential access unit?
Yeah, residential equivalent unit.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. So there's something that you could add to your list, Mario. I mean, it's not
A build-out
urgent
plan
for right now,
costs money.
but
so-
certainly, going forward, that's the kind of thing that we could investigate and perhaps write it up as a proposal and offer to the council and say, here's something that we think is valuable. How are we going to fund this? And at least it's an option,
A build-out plan does cost money because it takes research of every piece of property, what its use is zoned for, and what the maximum REU would be, and you take your total that you have left to go down the pipe, and you subtract that, and that could be a profit center for the village.
Sure.
And if we don't stop adding to our list, we're not going to get anything done.
Right, so
So are you
Get a
suggesting,
summary
do you
with
have
the
a
build-out.
motion?
Tonight kind of is about building the list. I do agree that we can't go on all night with this, but this is the point when we build the list,
Let's
and then we
get a
bring it back and you guys
summary
pare it down
build-out
and
plan.
prioritize.
Yeah, I put it on there, and I told it to him.
I do just want to kind of answer the question about, with a capital improvements plan, how that process could work, how it would likely work. Should that be something you say, all right, we're going to start tackling it, because it is a long process that takes a lot of different components. You would likely want to come up with a plan of, internal plan of what needs to be done, to make this plan real. What are all the components we need? And how do we get those done? And then you may, submit that, say, to council and say, we'd like to go after this project. We need, we need an evaluation done of our streets and water, and that may cost X. We need, perhaps a consultant to help us put it together. All the things that you identify in the steps of building a capital improvements plan, submit that to council to get their feedback, and then step by step along a timeline, requesting the council, should they approve it, to to get a consultant to get your the evaluations of your streets and stuff, or to contract with McKenna or a different planning and zoning consulting firm to help put together the plan. So it would be, that is how just that process would work, for instance. I just wanted to clarify how that process could work.
So do you need a motion, or do you just need a consensus of the board of having them bring back to us a list of what was discussed? And because I think some of these things can be knocked off almost right away. I mean, they're not, a lot of detail needs to be put into them. So how do you want to work it?
I have to say, there's probably also could be things on this list where council says, we don't really want that done.
Right.
Leave that alone. We've got that in a different format.
It's a summary list. We'll move on.
Focus on, Council Mike. Correct. Could you please do a food truck ordinance? They might really jump on something, I don't know. Some of these things, like the solicitation, they might say that's not in your purview, let that go. So let's get a list together and take it
See
to
where we
council, let them
stand.
know what we're thinking.
How to proceed, Jack?
Let's rock.
Okay, make it so.
You don't need a motion, do you?
No, I don't think so. I think we've
Summary,
given...
I'd say get
can
the
just
summary
directly-
list. and-
We've given instructions to our planner and our assistant manager, and I'll give him a copy of this, and he can go from there. Are you comfortable with that, Mario?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good.
I think Leslie's recommendation was appropriate. You know, I'll just present a summary of what we discussed tonight, so allow for further discussion. And then at some point when you feel comfortable with the list, you can start prioritizing it.
All right, good. Okay, thank you very much for everybody's contributions. I really appreciate that. That was a very, like Mario said, a very enlightening discussion, and I think we're off to at least a good start. All right, moving on then to item number 10, which is public comment, agenda and non-agenda items. I'll open the floor up to anybody in the public who would like to address the commission. I'll remind attendees that you're allowed to address the commission for up to 3 minutes. And we typically do not respond to public comment, but we will be happy to hear you. Is there anybody here? Would you please step up to the podium, please state your name and address, and state your business.
My name is Dale Walicki. I own the property at 59 North Washington. Until recently, it was my residence. September 15, 2013, a site plan was approved for the adjacent property at 57 North Washington. Some of you will remember the lawsuits over zoning and easements. Came in this afternoon looking for a copy of the site plan. Assistant manager was very helpful. We looked through the files. He looked in the basement. There is no site plan. Of course, that's a violation of Michigan's laws regarding retaining documents. Luckily, I recall the site plan, and many of you that were here at the time will remember they were drawn up by a gentleman named Clemente. Mr. Clemente was a professional engineer way over in Warren, who suddenly started showing up here in the village of Oxford in the spring of 2013, designed a number of buildings, was involved in the renovations of 57 North Washington next to me, was involved in the Becker Eye Care building, and was involved in 23 North Washington, which was the Sullivan's Pub. However, Mr. Clemente was not an engineer, and according to the state of Michigan, he did not even have a degree. Matter of fact, some other research indicates you can't even find a high school degree about him. And for 2 years, I fought this matter, and it went to court. I know some of you will recall this. This gentleman was not involved. It was the previous gentleman, Mr. Chris Corey.
Chris Corey, yes.
I'm going to go through a couple of dates very quickly. I won't tie you up. 1 month before the September meeting, a gentleman from Licensing and Regulatory Agency came into the building official and said, "Mr. Clemente's not an engineer. Why are you processing the drawing?" 2 months before, July, A Laura agent came into the office looking for the village manager. Couldn't find him, talked to Clerk Nasser. Don't you people know how to look up a licensed engineer? Let me show you. April 2015, 5 months before the September zoning hearing, my attorney, you remember the lawsuits, filed an amended brief in court with a certificate from the state of Michigan. It said Mr. Clementi's not an attorney. Now when you do that, the attorney for the village got a notice, which means in one of the many closed-door hearings, the council got notice Clementi's not an attorney. And I'm assuming that was cascaded through to the administration. Let's go on, let's see, Walton and Becker Eye Care. Mr. Curtis was here, he was very helpful. February 2014, March of 2015, Walton Becker Eye Care. Site plan review, he noticed there was no professional seal on the drawing. So he turned to Mr. Corey and he said, I'm going to make the motion to approve. He listed a number of engineering conditions. And then he said, but if the drawings aren't sealed, I'm expecting you'll follow up and seal these. And then, of course, the troubles I had in February 2014, my attorney, who's also a professional engineer, this went on for months. There was a zoning board of appeals hearing, there was a lawsuit. We kept telling Mr. Young, we kept telling Mr. Corey. Ms. Basardi was there. You were there, Mo. Rose, you were at the zoning board of appeals hearing. Mr. Curtis, you were there. There were numerous warnings that this gentleman wasn't an engineer. Sullivan's Irish Pub. Mr. Clementi did the drawings. So for 2 years, the planner, not this gentleman, Mr. Corey, had numerous opportunities to go to the state website, simply put in this gentleman's name, Clementi, and it would have come back, no individual found. We have 3 buildings in this community designed by gentlemen who professed to be a professional engineer and he wasn't. And I'm going to come right out and say he had help in the village. I've turned this material over before. A complaint was filed with Laura. The village had noticed, and still that site plan got approved. A building permit got issued by McKenna's. And here we are, 2 years it took for Mr. Corey, nothing got done. Here we are, 3 years after the September meeting. This gentleman is still out in the public. So, has anybody been over in the 3 years to look at what's next to my property? I hear all your grand plans and schemes. You got bigger problems here. Good night.
Thank you, Dale.
You're one of the people that was here when this happened.
You're
You
absolutely
used to-
right, but I want to say thank
Mr.
you.
Malicki?
You just violated the Open Meeting Act. Good night.
Anybody else in the audience?
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make public comment? All right, I'll take that as a no. All right, moving on to item 11, which is consultant and administrative comments. Mario, I'll leave that to you first, if you don't mind.
Nothing else at this time. I would just go on with my actions as directed with regard to the action plan.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, administrative comments?
I have just a few small things for you. One, the the village council requested some additional, some follow-up information about the development project by Mr. Weckel at 32, 36, and
Thank you.
43 East Burdick. I wanted to provide that update to you all as well. I the report that I was putting together for them was not finalized. I didn't include it in your packet, but I can give you the Cliff Notes version. We are working with him. I met with Mr. Weckel today. He's been working with our building official to make some minor adjustments, as I mentioned at our last Planning Commission meeting, taking longer than we would hope, but it takes time to get architectural drawings. There are just very minor details that in his architectural drawings for 32 East Burdick that need to be completed for his minor adjustment that he needs. Then he will be able to proceed with that. As you all remember from the PUD agreement, there are a number of deadlines. He received permission from the DDA, which is part of the PUD agreement, to change the timing or the staging of the project so that 32 wouldn't require permits before 36 and the parking lot. With that in mind, now 36 East Burdick and the parking lot are required per the PUD to have permits pulled before January 1 of 2019. In talking to Mr. Weckel, it is his expectation to do that.
Good.
He's been in frequent contact with us. He still has one house that still needs to be demolished, but it does not need to be demolished for 36 East Washington or East Burdick and the parking lot, so he expects to keep that up for a while longer. So there are a number of things that he needs to do. He is not currently in violation of the PUD agreement. While he may be moving a little bit slower than we would like, he is not in violation at this time, and he is working with the village. So we're optimistic for him, and we're doing everything that we can to help him move forward and get the permits that he needs to keep that going. So he's still got some lot splits and consolidations and some little things to do there, but again, we're optimistic for him, and if he does always have the option of applying for an extension should he need to. He hasn't indicated that's his plan, but that is an option, and however it moves going forward, I will be sure to let you all know, as well as the village council.
Good, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, do you happen to know the name of Mr. Weckel's engineer?
Not right offhand. I hope not.
Mario, would you happen to know? Well, okay. Thank you very much. Is there anything else?
Yes, Rose mentioned it, but I dropped off Planning Commission bylaws for you all just so you have them.
Thank you.
That's not a big update, but so they're there for you. Hold on to them.
Thank you. I will.
Last Friday, I had the opportunity to complete the RRC trainings with sessions 4, 5, and 6. I didn't have a chance to put together just a small report for you all about that, but I did receive all of the copies of all the training materials. When you complete it, they give you a flash drive with all that information. What I would like to do is sort of a continuing education opportunity for you all is to provide at each, in each meeting for X amount of time, just one copy of the slides from the training, and then a small discussion at the meeting about what was contained in that session, just for your all's reference. I think that would be a good way to kind of transfer some of the knowledge that came out of that, and I just thought it was a really useful seminar that if you all had the time to do in the future, it's obviously time consuming and over 2 days, but really a valuable experience that I got a lot out of. The last thing, just today we had a meeting with a potential developer for 130 Oakdale. That is a very small, oddly shaped parcel on the south end of town in the industrial district. There are currently 2 buildings there. What they're talking about doing is not redeveloping the site, but reusing it and putting in a brewery. That is permitted use in that district, but having a tap room in there is a special use. They have already submitted some information. We need a couple more things from them. We are anticipating that being on your agenda for a public hearing on October 16th.
Good.
So that's what I got for you.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much. All right, then moving on to commissioner comments. Ms. Leslie?
Nothing to add, thank you.
All right, thank you. Maureen?
Nope.
All right, thank you. Rose, would you give us any comments and a ZBA update, please?
Just that we're looking for a board member. We had a resignation, and if anybody's interested in it, they can fill out an application at the village office.
Good, thank you very much. Anything else?
That's it.
Jack, Oxford Township Planning Commission update, or any comments you have about this evening's meeting?
I'll talk about the Township Planning Commission.
Thank you.
We did approve final site plan for Grace Premier Center with some conditions. The conditions will be met before the building starts. The crown of this property is 80% of it is in Orion Township and 20% is in Oxford Township. Using the one stop, the township is working, coinciding all activities with Orion Township. The permits will be pulled. A percent of the permit money will come to Oxford so that Oxford can do the inspections coinciding with Orion's inspectors. The building is unique. It's 80 and 20. They will be repaving Manitou Lane, almost 600 feet of it, and rebuilding the road. So that church will be torn down Thursday, and they've already got the silt fence up in Orion, and they will be proceeding. I did mention the food trucks. It's a pretty big issue. One I didn't mention was ice cream trucks. We get a lot of noise complaints regarding, some use audio versus a bell, and it becomes so loud you can hear them a half a mile away. So this is one of the things we'd like to present to this commission to say, this is what we're doing in our solicitation ordinance. Is it something you might want? Other than that, we had lengthy discussion on the agricultural district in our northeast quadrant, and some minor tweaks to the ordinances are being done up there. That's it.
All right, thank you very much. Speaking as the chair, of course, you know how much I appreciate having members of the public coming in to address us, and usually they're a little bit more, conciliatory. Maureen, I heard you thank him for his comments.
I'm good, Gary.
I didn't think that his outburst was appropriate, Maureen.
Absolutely fine, it's all good.
And I resented it. I didn't think that it was appropriate for him to attack you that way, and I apologize for his bad
Let it
behavior.
go. He's a good man, let it go.
All right, I don't understand anything that he talked about. I don't know any of the veracity about that. I thought it was unfair of him to attack people who weren't here and present in the room. But nevertheless, he's obviously very passionate about what he believes in, and he has every right to come here and address us in that way, but I thought his treatment of you was particularly unfair.
I'm all good.
All right, good. I don't think you were in violation of the Open Meetings Act by thanking him for coming and making comments, but, that's just my take.
It's all good.
All right, good. All right, that all said, I want to thank you all for attending tonight, and I would entertain a motion to call this evening's meeting into adjournment.
So moved.
Support.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I have a motion to adjourn and support. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, we are adjourned at just a little bit after 8 o'clock.
8:11.